Anybody in the family driving?
Good afternoon. I don't have any announcements, but in the event anybody missed it, I'll bring you up to date of the event earlier this morning. This had occurred at 11 o'clock Iraq time, which by my calculations is about 4 a.m. our time here on the East Coast. There was a U.S. F-16 CJ, which was conducting routine no-fly zone enforcement over northern Iraq and fired a high-speed anti-radiation missile, HARM missile, at an Iraq early warning radar, which was operating as part of an integrated Iraq surface-to-air missile system. This occurred near the city of Mosul, and as in the past, this was done because this was part of a system that was a threat to coalition forces that are enforcing the no-fly zone there. The aircraft and air crew involved in the incident returned safely to their base. The damage to the Iraqi site is still being assessed, and we will continue to enforce the no-fly zone there in the north and also in the south. Now, if there are any questions on this one, I'll be happy to answer. Yeah, Bob.
Mike, the incident yesterday, they also said that damage was being assessed, as you said today.
Yeah.
Have you got any information at all about
No,
this
I don't have any
previous one?
update for the activities yesterday when several different missiles were fired.
Why haven't they been providing any information? Well, you haven't been providing information lately about the results of the attacks, whereas in the earlier ones, rather quickly were providing video. And
well, when we can, we seek to do so when, because of limitations with regard to our capabilities on battle damage assessment, when we can't, we don't.
What are the limitations?
Well, in some cases, cloud cover and other impediments like that, but I don't want to get into too many details.
As weather
Mike?
this time?
Yeah,
Captain,
just a second.
This is the latest, in, what, about 3 or 4 incidents all around the vicinity of Mosul in about the last week or so. Do we have any readout on what Iraqi assets are in Mosul that they seem to be particularly skittery about?
What the Iraqis? No, I think that the best way to characterize Iraqi activity over the past several weeks actually has been that they have been attempting to challenge the enforcement of the no-fly zone, both on the ground in their integrated air defense systems and also in the air with these periodic incursions they make into the no-fly zones. There were a number of those that occurred today, as they have in past days, both in the south and in the north. And I think this fits into the overall pattern that the Iraqis have established over the last several weeks, which show an intent to be provocative with regard to these no-fly zones.
You say that there were several today. Can you give us a readout on some of those?
There were in the south 5 violations involving 21s, 23s, 25s, and an at least one F1. And in the north, there were 2 involving 21s and F1s.
Mike,
Yeah.
were they, today, did they actually get their missile launched before?
No, there was no launch of a missile. As I say, this was an early warning site which was fully integrated into their SAM system, and certainly when our pilots and air crews feel threatened by the activities of the Iraqis in the no-fly zone, we take action to protect pilots and air crews, and this was exactly what happened in this case.
Mike,
Yeah, just 1 second, Jamie.
In all of the recent instances in which U.S. planes have fired weapons, they've been either actively targeted or they were fired on by missiles. Was that the case in this incident? And if not, has there been any change in the rules of engagement for U.S. and British planes patrolling the no-fly zones?
Well, Jamie, I think, as you know, we don't talk about rules of engagement, but I will say that from the outset of the establishment of the no-fly zones, both in the north in 1991 and in the south in 1992, we have continually said that it is our policy to enforce the no-fly zones and to take measures which we deem appropriate to protect our pilots and air crews, and that's what we've continually done. What's changed in the last several weeks is a decision evidently on the part of Saddam Hussein to challenge the no-fly zones. And as I said just a minute ago, you've seen this in the actions that he's taken with regard to flights into both the southern and the northern no-fly zone, and the use of his integrated air defense systems and SAM systems against coalition aircraft that are trying to enforce these no-fly zones. The environment, as a result of these actions, is a different environment from what it was 6 months ago. It's an environment that is very highly charged. But the thing that has not changed is we have said from the very outset that our pilots and air crews are going to take those measures that they feel are appropriate to protect themselves.
Nevertheless, in response to the increased threat that you've just outlined, have U.S. pilots been given any new guidance about how they should respond to these provocations?
I'm not going to get into operational details. I think you can understand that we don't want to reveal to the Iraqis any details that they may find valuable as they go about these challenges. What we are consistent in doing, what we have done from the outset in both cases, is to enforce the no-fly zones and to take any actions that we feel are appropriate to protect our pilots and air crews. We'll continue to do that.
On the 5 violations, were any U.S. aircraft in those areas at the time, or were there any confrontations, or was it strictly the very timid?
No,
cheat
in
and
fact,
retreat?
in the south and in the north today, there were no aircraft in the vicinity when those violations took place. Yes, Steve?
Along the lines of what he was asking just a moment ago, I mean, should we understand this incident as the pilot's individual decision or as a planned effort to deal with a specific problem? In other words, did the patrol go out with the intention of doing what it did, or was that merely a response to the situation?
First of all, I'm not going to answer your question directly. I will say 2 things, though. First of all, I want to emphasize that this radar site, this early warning radar site, is part of an integrated system. This is not something where people get on a telephone. Think of it kind of like those strings of firecrackers that as young people we sometimes lit off. You only light one fuse, but within nanoseconds, the whole bunch of them are going off. And this was the first step in an integrated system which ultimately could have shot down one of our aircraft. That didn't happen. And we will take actions in the future that are appropriate to prevent that kind of thing from occurring. And the other thing that I will say is that we, all over the world, empower our commanders who are in charge of forces to ensure that they take measures that are necessary to protect those forces. And certainly that is true of any aircraft commander, any pilot who is in command. He's going to take those actions which are going to protect him, his aircraft, and his crew. Yeah.
Do you know what type of SAM batteries were being fed by this radar, and how quickly did it go off the air?
I don't have that level of detail. Yeah.
Two questions. Did it go off the air? And secondly, is this the only Iraqi early warning radar in the north part of the country, or is this one of 8 or one of 10?
I can't give you a total quantity, but I would say that the number of this type of radar systems throughout the country numbers in excess of 100.
Mike?
Yeah, just one second, let me get this one.
This early warning radar is the type of radar that's been active regularly in the past. And while it is linked to the integrated air defense system, it's not directly linked to anti-aircraft missiles. It's the type of target, it is a specific target that the U.S. and Britain has chosen not to strike in the past. That does represent a change in approach or in policy, if not in rules. How can you say that it's not a change in the rules? Is it technically not a change in the rules of engagement? Not a change in instruction? What is the parameters for our pilots shifted at all? What is the change?
The change is the environment that has been created by Saddam Hussein, which has repeatedly manifested itself in threats to coalition aircraft that are trying to enforce the no-fly zone.
But our pilots have responded in kind by changing
Our
target
pilots
sets.
today and in 1991 and in 1992 have the authority to take actions that are appropriate to protect themselves.
But in the past have chosen not
And,
to
well,
take
I'm
out
not.
sites like this.
I am not going to, number one, provide any kind of detail about ROE or tactics. Just not going to get into operational details. I'm also not going to use comparisons of activities a year and a half, 2, 3, 4 years ago with activities now. The environment is totally different today than it was in past times. And the environment certainly plays a major role in the kinds of responses that we make to threats.
But it's clear to people who watch it closely, including the Iraqis, for example, that this is a change in the way that we're going about doing business there.
It is clear to the Iraqis, if they have been watching our activities over the past years, that we are enforcing the no-fly zone. We have done that since 1991 in the north, since 1992 in the south. We ourselves, the United States, has flown over 140,000 sorties in support of the no-fly zone since they were first started. Coalition aircraft, almost 200,000 if you include that number. And we're going to continue doing that.
And this is the first time we've hit an early warning radar in a heck of a long time.
This is not the first time we have hit a radar that is associated with a SAM site, and we are certainly not going to take chances on our air crews and pilots who are enforcing the no-fly zone.
Mike, does the U.S. military have a handle on what the strategy of Saddam's armed forces, the enemy's armed forces in this case, is about? Are they trying to drive the U.S. and British planes out of the fly zone? Are they trying to draw blood? Are they trying to shoot down a plane so they might have some little bit of victory? Or what has happened?
I think that their overall goal is to get rid of all of the constraints on Iraq. And those constraints are no-fly zones, sanctions, the inspections of their weapons of mass destruction, all of the things that the international community is is concerned about. All of this designed to, all of these actions on the part of the international community, sanctions, inspections, no-fly zone, was to contain Iraq and to keep Iraq from threatening its own populations and threatening its neighbors, and continuing to develop weapons of mass destruction.
Mike, is the United States more aggressively enforcing the no-fly zone in response to Iraq's defiance and challenge of the no-fly zones?
We are continuing to enforce the no-fly zone as we have for many years. We are taking actions appropriate to the threats that exist in the no-fly zones. We will continue to enforce the no-fly zones, and we will continue to take actions that are appropriate to protect our pilots and our air
Are you
crews.
saying there's no change in the way that you're enforcing the no-fly zone?
I am not characterizing any kind of activity other than to say that we are going to continue to do what we have done for these many years, and we are going to continue to protect our pilots and our air crews as they go about this enforcement.
Understanding that you don't want to divulge any rules of engagement or tactics, can you at least say whether U.S. pilots have been given new guidance that have, in the last couple of days that are enforcing the no-fly zone?
Nice try, but we went through that one before. I want to say one more time because...
You want to answer that question?
No, I'm not going to go into any kind of tactics, rules of engagement, anything like that. I think it is clear from all the actions that have been reported for the past several weeks that certainly the Iraqi approach to the no-fly zones has changed, and our actions in response have been appropriate and have been essentially responsive to the provocations that the Iraqis have made.
Ken Bacon and General Zinni last week talked about the fact that Iraq had increased the number of surface-to-air missile batteries in both the northern and southern no-fly zones. Does the mere presence of those batteries violate the no-fly zone?
Well, we've said in the past that Iraqi air defense systems, that they're SAM systems, when they are in these no-fly zones and when they are used against the planes that are enforcing the no-fly zones, are a violation, and we will take action as appropriate to respond to these violations.
Do you reserve the right then to strike any of these missiles that have been moved into the no-fly zone, regardless of whether they're actually turned on or targeted?
I'm not
as
going to
planes?
forecast any kind of action that we might take, except to say that we'll continue to enforce the no-fly zone.
I'm not asking you to forecast, I'm just saying, do you have the right to strike those if you choose?
I am saying that we will take actions that we deem appropriate to enforce the no-fly zones and to protect our pilots and air crews.
Does that include preemptive action?
I'm not going to get into any kind of speculation of what kinds of activities it might involve. What I'm going to say is that we'll continue to enforce the no-fly zone. We'll protect our pilots and air crews.
If I can understand
Yeah.
just a couple of factual things. Was this radar actually operating at the time it was fired on?
It was actually operating.
And has it been operating in the same way in recent days, weeks, months?
I can't give you a history of it, but certainly today it was operating as part of this integrated system and presented a threat to the aircraft that was involved in the no-fly zone enforcement.
Don't know if it's been
In
on
past
board?
days, I don't know the history of the specific site, and I don't think that's relevant either. I think the relevance here is that here was a system that was involved in the initial process of acquiring and perhaps firing a missile at one of our aircraft, and an appropriate action was taken to respond to that threat.
Well, Mike, it is relevant for the very reason that you described, that what's changed here is the threat. So a radar that might be operating routinely and not be perceived as a threat by the United States, say, a week or two ago or maybe a month ago, in today's environment in which Iraq has threatened to shoot down a plane, has been aggressively attempting to carry out that threat, that same radar operating the same way might today constitute a threat, and that's why it is relevant whether it's been operating has it been operating the same way, or is this a radar that's been silent for months and suddenly was just turned on today?
Yeah, I can't answer your question of what the history of this particular radar site is.
Mike,
Yeah.
was it integrated
Just
to
one
more than
second.
one?
Let me just get this one, and I'll be
Well, I
right
just
back.
want to ask about the type of radar.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure this radar is, the concern about this radar was that it was tied to SAM batteries. It was not that he was using this data from this radar to vector his planes in and out of the no-fly zone, by being able to watch where U.S. planes were.
It was part of an integrated SAM system.
But what was he actually doing? What was it at its purpose? Was it to monitor Allied aircraft in the no-fly zone
It
for
was-
purposes of vectoring fighters in and out, or is it a radar that in the end actually feeds a SAM battery?
It feeds a SAM battery.
Was it integrated with more than one SAM site, or?
I can't tell you. It was certainly integrated with at least one SAM site. Yeah.
Were they, any indication that they were trying to set up a SAM trap by any chance?
Well, it's conceivable that that there was a SAM trap also involved in this thing. That's certainly the approach that the Iraqis have taken in many of these instances, but I don't believe that in this particular case that it was necessarily that. Yeah.
You said that there were about 100 of these types of radars.
I said there were more than
100 of these types of radars all over Iraq.
Yeah.
Have they never presented a threat before? Can you explain why this
I'm not
one-
sure the history of these radars, whether it is a new system that would integrate them into an overall system, or whether this has been done in the past. Certainly the activities of the Iraqis over the last several weeks shows that they're being aggressive on a variety of fronts. And this was manifested today in this
But what I'm
in
just
this
not
incident.
getting is, what is it that happened today that made this one a threat as opposed to the last several weeks with more than 100 of these radars?
I'm not sure that in the past that they have been active in this way.
Mike, how
Yeah.
many, since the 4 days of raids in December, how many times have missiles actually been launched at or near U.S. aircraft?
I don't think we've had any cases where we've had a missile that actually was close to one of our aircraft. We have taken action that essentially precluded that.
And how many times has that happened? How many times have our aircraft?
I don't have with me. I'm sure
dodged?
we can give you a rundown on the total number of incidents that have occurred over the past several weeks. We can get that for you, but I don't happen to have that right with me right now.
But can you say then that the
But they-
U.S. aircraft can evade these types of missiles readily?
Well, we certainly are very conscious of what is going on both in the north and the south. We have a variety of assets which are available to us to keep apprised of what the Iraqis are up to, and we use all of those to the full extent to ensure that when we fly these missions, that our crews are protected to the fullest extent. And that's what we'll continue to do in the future as we go about enforcing these no-fly zones.
What's the status of the additional F-16s and tanker aircraft that have been dispatched? to the
They
Gulf?
have not arrived, but they should be there by late this week.
Are those planes going to be augmenting the forces in the south?
South.
In the south?
Right.
And can you say where they're going?
I can't
What country
tell
they're
you
going to?
where they're going, but they'll be deploying to bases in the region there. And it actually, you know, there's some tankers also involved in this. I think the deployment is going to involve both the fighter aircraft and also the tankers, and the exact bases, I think you know that we don't reveal exactly where they're going. It's, let me just,
And do you know where the 16s are coming from?
hold on just 1 second, let me see. They're coming from Shaw Air Force Base, and do I have eight of the F-16s, and the tankers are number 4. Yeah.
Can you add anything or give any more detail on a report that that Baghdad has offered a bounty for U.S. pilots?
No, but I think that this is consistent with the other provocative activities that have been going on recently, and certainly is another of the litany of activities that leads us to be very watchful of activities in the north and in the south.
Is this so this did happen as far as you?
I know more about it than I have read in the newspapers, but certainly that is among the things that we are hearing about that are coming out of Iraq, and certainly that among other pieces of rhetoric that we've heard from Saddam Hussein, as General Zinni mentioned last week, and actions that were taken by the Iraqi legislature. All of these things put together certainly indicate a direction that they are taking that is certainly provocative.
Did you notice recently, these last several days, some significant movements of troops, of Iraqi troops in the country?
No, but we have not noticed any significant movement of ground forces there. Yeah.
With this threat of shooting down one of our airplanes, did you beef up any kind of pararescuemen or assets to get people out if they in fact do get shot down?
I think you know that we have always capabilities when we undertake any kind of missions with a threat associated. We always have a SAR capability, a rescue capability, and that certainly is true in this case. I don't want to get into details about what the configuration of those forces are, but we maintain very capable forces for exactly that purpose.
Mike?
Yeah.
Does DoD have any indications that there was one or more organized coup attempts by dissident factions within the Iraqi military while Desert Fox was ongoing?
I think General Zinni talked about this last week, and he outlined some of the activities that have been going on, but I don't believe that we have any specific independent information regarding coup attempts.
Do you have a type designation on the early warning radar you took out? Or you
No,
tried to
I
take
don't.
out?
I don't have that.
Captain Doubleday, regarding the increased number of surface-to-air missiles Iraq has put in the no-fly zone, can you give us some numbers of how many additional missiles have been moved in, or in some other way characterize the increase?
Well, I think Ken last week indicated that that there has been increased activity in both the south and in the north. And he at that time indicated he wasn't going to get into numbers, and I'll adhere to that policy.
What about, have you had any movement of Iraqi aircraft, and have any of those aircraft either moved to bases or from bases that are actually located in the no-fly zone?
There has been some movement of Iraqi aircraft from bases. I can't at this point characterize for you the extent of it, but we have seen some movement of bases, of aircraft operating from bases that they previously had not operated from.
Bases in the no-fly zones?
In fact, bases in the no-fly zone, right.
Are those planes then subject to strike
Well, certainly-
by virtue of the fact that they flew into the no-fly zone to land there?
I think you know that our policy has always been that aircraft that fly in the no-fly zone are certainly subject to the enforcement activities.
Even if they're on the ground at the time?
I'm not going to get into that kind of detail, but certainly aircraft that are in the no-fly zone providing any kind of militarily significant activity are subject to enforcement activity.
Were these movements, and I'm just guessing here, but were these movements by any chance at night when U.S. planes were not patrolling the no-fly zone?
I can't tell you what time of day or night it would have been.
Were they all fixed wing, or were there some helicopters involved as well?
Can't give you a breakdown. I just don't happen to know. Yeah.
If I'm understanding correctly, it seems that the policy now is that when radars are turned on that may be potentially hostile, that they're subject to attack. Is it also true that air bases from which aircraft that are maybe potentially hostile are launched are targets as well?
I'm not going to provide you a target list, but I will say that that certainly actions that we believe are threatening, as we've always said, are going to be dealt with, and we'll continue to enforce those no-fly zones in the north and the south.
Do you expect a escalation or a de-escalation from Saddam?
I make no prediction where that man is involved.
Would you say that fighter jets on the ground in the no-fly zone pose a threat to U.S. planes?
I think that I would leave that kind of a decision up to the commanders to make, and I would not want to predict what their decisions might be.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.